We're going to pick a random product from Amazon, and then we're going to model, texture, and render this in Blender. This is the easiest way to make some money with Blender. If you want to learn more about the tools and techniques that you see me using in these videos, then check out my new Blender ebook, the link is below. The best kind of reference image that you can get for product visualization is the first image on that product's page on Amazon. We can right click, save image as. I'm going to save this to the new folder on my computer, and we can use this as a background image in Blender to tell us how wide this is and how thick this is and whatever. Then I'm going to pull out PureRef, and I'm going to drag and drop a couple more images in there. If you don't have PureRef, you can just search PureRef on Google, click on this download button, you can figure out the rest. It's just a little program where you can put some pictures that you can look at on your screen while you're modeling. I'm also going to save the side view image to my computer, and I'll try to get as many reference images as I can from different angles so that I can look at this as a modeling. We can see more or less everything that we need to see over here, so this should be enough for now. If we need some more images, we can just Google this product. In Blender, I'm going to go to side view, Shift A, image, reference, and I'm going to load up my reference image so I can put it in the background. I want to add a little bit of transparency to this image over here on the side, and I'll just throw this in the background. I'm also going to look at the scene from the other side, and I'll load in this other reference image. It might be a good idea to go back to front view so we can adjust the size of both of these images to make sure that they align perfectly. As you can see, the height is exactly the same, which means all the other dimensions are going to be proportional as well. So we can just throw this in the background and we're ready to go. Now we can start modeling this pair of headphones. This has got to be the ugliest pair of headphones I've ever seen in my life. I wanted to model this cooler looking pair, but I didn't feel like it. This one is a lot more simple, so it's easier to model. Maybe if this video does really well, then we can model this one as well. So let's start by modeling this big piece first. I'm going to align my cube with the top of this headphone. I'll take the lower face and I'll bring it down to the bottom. I'll adjust the width, and now I'm going to subdivide this a couple of times. When I subdivide this, I'm going to make 2 loop cuts so I can get a better control of the shape. And now I can scale this loop cut up a little bit on the x-axis. We can scale this one up a little bit on the y-axis, and the corner vertices we're going to scale inwards on the z and the x-axis so they match the shape a little bit better. You can see the shape is more or less correct now. We just have to make it a little bit bigger, so let's do that. Now we're going to go to front view, and then we're going to figure out that this has to be a lot thinner, and it's also supposed to be sitting at an angle like this, which means we also have to scale it up a little bit so it matches the dimensions. We're going to add a loop cut around the whole shape like this. Then we'll select these vertices, Control plus, and with individual origins we're going to scale them down a little bit to control the shape. With Alt S, I'm going to inflate this a little bit, check even offset, and we can now move some of this geometry down a little bit on the local z axis. We can move this up on the local z-axis. The shape is more or less okay on the outside. We're still gonna have to change something on the inside, but we'll get to that in a second. Object, shade smooth. Make sure to save this file because this shit can crash any minute. And now we're going to select these faces on the inside. We're gonna inset them with I. Then I'll take this edge loop around this and I'll slide it inwards a little bit with double G. I'm also going to deflate these inner faces a little bit with Alt S. I'll make them a little bit bigger, and then I can extrude them, and they're gonna give me this little curvy shape over here. I can delete the faces on the inside because I don't need them. And we can also control the shape of this cross section by sliding some of these edge loops around, scaling them up or down, moving them around a little bit, and seeing what works out best. I think this is more or less the shape that we need for the outside part of the headphone. Let's quickly figure out this cushioning thing on the inside. I'm going to take this edge loop right here. With P, I'm going to separate it to new object. Now I'm going to fill it with F, because when I fill it, I can extrude it in the direction of the face. And that way I can give it enough thickness. Give me another loop cut this way so I can control the shape better. We're going to scale this whole thing up a little bit. Slide this edge loop backwards. Use Alt S to push this rear face backwards a little bit more. We can even bevel this to add some extra geometry that we can use to create this curve back here. And just again, adjust the size of the different loop cuts to try to match this cross section that you can see in the reference image. Object, shade smooth, correct the normals. And I think the rough shape of this looks quite nice because it matches the reference almost perfectly. We're going to bevel this outer edge loop so we can get some new geometry, and then that new geometry we can extrude inwards to create the hollow part on the inside. Scale that down to make it nice and smooth. We're gonna have to play around with this curve a little bit more to match the shape properly, and we can extrude this inwards one more time to create this inner part. Extrude it again, right click, scale it up, and now we can delete this face. And as you can see, now we have this inner part of the cushion. We just have to fill that with a different surface, so maybe we can duplicate this, right click, scale it down a little bit, and let's just give that a nice grid fill. Go up here to the viewport overlays, check face orientation. This way we can check if we have any fucked up normals. This surface is red, so I'm going to select it, Shift N to correct the normals, and now everything is blue, so we're good to go. Now the rough shape of the headphone is ready. We can start adding some of the smaller details. So let's check what are the details that we have to add. We have this little hole over here. I'm guessing that's a charging port or something. We have this little knob, which is probably a volume knob or something like that. Then we just have a little hole over here where you have this thing that goes around your head. And there's a button, whatever that does, Bluetooth connection, who gives a fuck. It looks like we have this little hole on both sides. It's not a charging port, it's something else, it doesn't matter. And in this image over here, I can see that we also have some tiny little details down here at the bottom. This is gonna be pretty simple to make, but we're gonna need quite a bit of geometry on this to create that. So we're gonna have to start applying the subdivision surface modifier. Since since we're gonna have to apply the subdivision surface modifier, let's duplicate this and throw it to the side somewhere in case we mess something up, because as you know, the subdivision surface modifier is destructive. So once we apply it and we start working with this shit, we're not gonna be able to undo this anymore. We would have to create this whole shape from scratch again, and I definitely don't want to do that. So now that we have a little backup, let's apply, say, 2 levels of subdivision for a start. That's not going to be enough, so let's undo that. Give me 3 levels, apply that, and now we can start adding these little shapes, and we can add some more subdivision later. So first of all, we have this little shape over here. To create that, I'm going to select 9 faces like this, inset until I get the rough width of this little hole. Take these edges from the side and slide them with double G. I'm going to set the factor to -0.6, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. We might have to do a little bit further so we have the same length on both sides. So let's try -0.7 instead. It doesn't matter too much, this is good enough. Now we can delete this surface on the inside. If we subdivide this, it's going to become more round and smooth. Now we just have to slide some of this geometry outwards a little bit like this, and that's going to give us the round shape on the outside that we're trying to accomplish here. We're also going to slide these inwards a couple of times. Maybe we can even scale this down a little bit. We just have to try and avoid any artifacts, and as you can see, we have a little bit of that going on over here. We should be able to fix that by just sliding some of these edges so that they align with these outer vertices. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, and then if we take these vertices on the corners here, we can use Alt-S to adjust them a little bit and maybe fix some of the folding. The problem here is that we have some really long and stretched out faces like this. Ideally, we need some more loop cuts that go around this shape like this, and that way this is going to look more like little tiles, and that's going to give us a better result. And this is where it might be a good idea to bring back our old mesh, because we fucked up, and I'm going to add a couple of loop cuts like this just so these faces are more like squares, and now with my loop tools I can relax these and turn them into a circular shape. We're going to have to deflate this a little bit because we made them a little bit too thick now, and now we have a perfect shape with more geometry, which is going to allow us to make this hole a little bit better. This is why it's really important to understand topology. I teach you guys how to manage your topology better in my ebook, but if you don't want to pay, just go watch Thomas Colin 3D. He's got a bunch of videos that show you guys how to make absolutely flawless topology. But now that we got better geometry, let's again duplicate this new version and throw it to the side. Apply 3 levels of subdivision, and now it's going to be easier to create this shape without any problems like we had before. So let's select 3x4, inset that, slide these down by, let's say, -0.4. Same thing on this side. Now we can delete this subdivision surface, slide these edges backwards, slide these edges apart the same way we did earlier, and next thing you know, we got a beautiful hole here with no artifacts at all. Now we can just fill this, extrude it inwards, press S to scale, but don't move your mouse, just click once. Now you can set the scaling orientation to normal, and this is going to allow you to scale along the normal line of this face. So if we set that to 0, we're going to be able to make this face perfectly flat, and now we can just bevel this to make the shading a little bit nicer. We're also going to bevel this outer edge to make the shading a bit nicer. We're going to uncheck loop slide because that's going to make our edges a bit more even, and tell me that's not absolutely beautiful. We're going to have the same thing on the other side, so we're going to mirror that in a moment. Maybe we should mirror that right now because we have to create these other buttons, and they're not symmetrical on both sides. So let's select this edge loop in the middle, Control E, mark seam. Now in face select mode, I'll press L to select this entire half, delete the faces on that, place the 3D cursor on the origin point, 3D cursor's pivot point, Shift D, right click, scale to -1 of the x-axis, correct the normals, merge by distance, and we're good to go. Maybe it would be a good idea to take this top view image and place it into our scene so we can look at it from the top view, and then we can figure out exactly the size and place of these little holes that we have here. So I'm going to use my print screen tool to crop this shit out from the Amazon page, copy the clipboard. In PaintNet, we're going to adjust the colors a little bit because this is hard to look at. You can't even see what you're doing. And now let's save this as top reference. In Blender, we're going to load this up and align it with our object. It doesn't have to be exact as long as it approximately tells us what we're supposed to do. Notice how this is sitting at an angle. In the reference image, it's perfectly straight, so it's not going to give us exactly what we're looking at. But it doesn't matter, I'm just interested in the approximate size and position of these things. So we're going to select a vertex right around here somewhere. And then with Control+, we're going to expand the selection. I'm going to try to get it so it's shaped approximately like a square. As you can see, the faces are a little bit longer than they are wide. So you have to select a few more rows on the top and the bottom. Now you might think that we can just inset this, loop tool, circle, uncheck, flatten, and forget about it. But as you can see, that's a complete atrocity, and there's no way that we can get this shit under control. So we're gonna have to do something different. Here's my technique that I haven't seen anybody else teach. You inset this a little bit like this. We're going to slide this edge inwards a little bit so we have approximately the same thickness on both sides. Give me the same shit on the other side and on the bottom as well. Now we're going to select the outline here, viewport overlays, check statistics, and now you can see how many edges we have selected. We have 32 edges, which means if we turn this geometry into a circle, it's going to be 32 vertices. So place the 3D cursor in the middle of this shape, select some faces in the middle, and press Shift 7 to align your view with those faces. Make sure the 3D cursor is there. Add a new circle with 32 vertices and align that with your view. Now you can scale this down, you can rotate it a little bit, do whatever you got to do. Fill this circle and add a shrink wrap modifier. Target the surface below, set the wrap method to project, and then just lower it so it it nicely wraps onto the surface. Make sure that it is completely inside this surface which we inset, so it's important that the circle is smaller than that. Now you can apply the shrink wrap modifier and join it into the same object as the headphones. Delete the hole in the middle. Now select the edge loop around the circle and the edge loop around this hole. W, bridge edge loops, delete the face on the inside, and you got a perfect circular hole. We got some of this twisting shit again, but that's fine. We just have to separate some of these vertices a little bit. As Thomas Colin said, you can use the shiny madcap to check if you have any shading artifacts, and then you can correct that if you gotta correct it. Once we got a hole there, fill it, extrude it inwards. Again, scale it to 0 on the normal z-axis. We can also move it along the normal z-axis, and that way we can adjust the depth. We can bevel this, bevel the outside of this hole, and that's absolutely fucking perfect. We're going to need another hole somewhere around here, and it's going to be approximately the same size as this one. So we're going to select another surface like this, and we're just gonna do the same shit. I'm not gonna show you twice. Once we got a circle here, we can extrude it inwards. We can just delete the face at the bottom because we're not gonna see this thing anyway. Again, give me a small bevel up here, and this is where we're going to create this little volume knob or whatever the fuck that is. Before we do that, we're going to need one more hole, but this one's going to be a little bit longer, and that's going to be around here somewhere. Once we got the holes in place for the buttons, we can very easily use the geometry from the outside of those holes to create the buttons. So we're going to select this edge loop and this edge loop on the other button on the other side. P to separate those into new objects. Now we're going to fill this one, extrude it out a little bit. This one we're going to fill and extrude it out a little bit more. This one has to be completely flat, so let's scale normal and 0 on the normal z-axis. Then we can push it out a little bit further. As you can see, it should stick out quite a little bit. This button has to have a 1 segment bevel, and since we're going to subdivide that, we have to delete the face on the inside, and we have to slightly bevel these two edges. This button's ready to go. Let's just quickly take care of this one. This shit has to go inside. We're going to have to subdivide this because we need more geometry here. Get rid of this shit, fill this in somehow, some way. We might even have to subdivide it again and apply the subdivision surface modifier. But the reason we're doing this is so we can select one little segment like this, inset that segment, extrude, right click, Alt S to push it inwards, and now this is going to give us these little lines that go around this button. We can select this, Control I, delete everything else except this face because we have to align our view with this face. Now take this segment, Alt E, spin, give me 64, and now we can add some subdivision surface to this, and look at how cute that looks. I'm not gonna bake this as a normal map. I don't care about the polygon counts. If you guys care about the polygon counts, you want to bake this as a normal map. I don't mind this shit rendering for 3 days. Now we get to the fun part. This is the shit that goes around your head. This is the part that makes these headphones look stupid. We got this thing coming up here towards the top, and then it splits into 2 parts. Here's how you make something like that. Keep in mind that this is also gonna have to be curved, and it's gonna have to follow a perfect circle. So pay attention. First of all, we're going to create a hexagon. Why are we creating a hexagon and not a pentagon? Because if you have a hexagon and you subdivide it, it's still going to look like a perfect circle. But if it's a pentagon and you subdivide this, I know that it looks like a circle right now, but once you extrude this and subdivide this, you could very easily see that it's not. It's not that smooth. A hexagon is much nicer. The other reason we're using a hexagon is because it's still very low poly, so it's still very easy to separate this into 2 directions. So here's how you do that. We're going to join these middle vertices right here, lift this up, delete these faces, place the 3D cursor right here, 3D cursor as a pivot point, then duplicate this edge loop, scale to -1 on the z-axis, merge vertices by distance, then take these edges on this side and extrude them out to the side. You can bring this to the middle, and now you can mirror this over to the other side. Now we have this junction right here. We just have to rotate it, scale it down, and turn this into this kind of fork shape that we're trying to get here. Now we can subdivide this, delete any faces on the ends like this, object shade smooth, and add a loop cut down here to tighten up this corner a little bit. Maybe you can adjust the shape up here, or even lower these 2 faces down. And once you play around with this for a while, you're gonna get very close to the shape that you're looking for. You might have to make this thing a little bit wider. Once we have this fork shape, we're going to align it with the reference image in the back. Then we're going to make a couple more adjustments to this shape to control the thickness down here. We have to make this a little bit thinner, and we just have to make sure that this looks the way it's supposed to look. Once we got the right shape and the right thickness and all this, we have to bend this. So to do that, we're going to create a large circle in the middle of these headphones, scale that and align it with the reference image. Then we're gonna cut off this bottom part, subdivide this a couple of times, apply the subdivision surface, object, convert this into a curve. We're gonna place the origin point of this shape down here, snap this to the origin point, and now we're going to add a curve modifier, and we're going to target this curve which we just created. We gotta adjust the deform axis. In this case, the z-axis works best. And now when we move this along the z-axis, it's going to follow this curve. So in side view, we're going to lift this up until we align it with the reference here. And now we can just continue to extrude this further down. And that new extrusion is also going to follow this curve. We're also going to extrude this up. And we just have to adjust this height until it gets exactly into the middle. Something like this will do. We can also readjust that manually in a second. Let's duplicate this whole setup in case we fuck something up, because we are again about to apply these modifiers. If we're going to apply the curve modifier, it has to be above the subdivision surface modifier. But if it's above the subdivision surface modifier, then we won't have any more geometry for this to bend properly. So we're going to loop cut this to distribute the geometry a bit more evenly. Then we're first going to apply one level of subdivision surface. And once we apply that, we can add another subdivision surface modifier just to make things nicer for now in the preview. And now we got the shape that we're looking for. Let's cut this shit off at the bottom. I'm going to use my proportional editing to adjust this part of the curve slightly. And it looks like I also have to make this whole bottom part slightly thicker. That way it's going to match my reference a little bit better. Apply the curve modifier, and now we got the shape that we want. We just have to make this simple little joint down here. So let's do that really quickly. Set the mean crease to 1 right here. Fill that. Extrude it down a little bit. We're going to slightly bevel that just to make this little gap between the metal and this rubber. Extrude, right click, Alt S to push it inwards. We're going to lift this up to line it with the reference again. Lift this part up as well. Then we're going to inset the face at the bottom. Extrude it down. And this has to be perfectly straight, so we can't bend this or do anything fancy. At the end, we're going to fill this face. And with Ctrl B, we're going to bevel it. Then press C to prevent this clipping. Scroll up a couple of times to add some more segments. Set the shape to 0.5. And now we got this little ball at the end. We're going to replace these two creases with a tiny little bevel, and that bevel has to have a shape of 1 and 2 segments. We're going to do the same thing up here just for the sake of shading, and then we just need a cylinder to connect this with the hole down here. So give me a cylinder with 12 vertices, delete the top and the bottom faces, and then just scale this down and rotate it into place. We're going to adjust the position of the headphone so that this connects properly. Object, shade smooth, and look at how pretty that is. Let's use our 3D cursor to mirror this over to the other side. Make sure to connect these by scaling into 0 on the y-axis, merge by distance, and finally we have to create this little mesh or this little net on the inside here. I think these headphones are starting to grow on me. I don't think they look so stupid anymore. I still don't know if I could walk around with this thing on my head, but this does look pretty clean because of how simple it is. So how do you make this little mesh? First of all, there's a little gap down here into which this net is seated. This is what holds the net. This is where it's glued into or stitched into or whatever. So to do that, we're gonna have to select some edge loops kind of like this. Then we can slide this up to make it a little bit more round. Now we can make a little bevel here like this, then just extrude this, right click and Alt S to push it inwards. We can delete the faces on the inside. If you want to make this a little bit tighter, you can also bevel this, and I think that looks a little bit nicer now. So to make the net itself, let's take these two edge loops around the trench, separate them to a new object, select both of them, W, bridge edge loops. In this case, we get a big mess if we just bridge the edge loops. So first we're gonna fill a face like this, then we're gonna select the edge loops, W, bridge edge loops, and we're good. We're doing this so we can add a loop cut in the middle and delete the other two loop cuts. And now we can go to face, grid fill, and look at that. It's like Blender already knows what we're trying to accomplish. Not only that, but it's damn near exactly the shape that we're trying to get as well. To be quite honest with you, I don't even want to mess with this shape anymore. I'm just gonna leave it like it is. It's good enough for me. Object, shade smooth, and then to make this net here, we're gonna need a texture, and we're going to have to use an alpha map to make the transparent parts. So now let's move on to getting some textures and materials going. The good news is we're only gonna have to download 2 materials for this. We're gonna need the net up here, also this fabric down here. This might even be the same texture, except this one is not transparent. The problem is that I can't for the life of me find a material which is going to give me this kind of transparent net here. So instead, I'm going to make my own in Blender. I'm not gonna show you how I made the net texture maps. Maybe I'm an asshole. I don't feel like showing this to you guys. I gotta sit here all day every day explaining the same shit. You can download this model on Patreon, so if you wanna download these textures, you can get them over there. But I got a normal map here, and then I also have an alpha map which is going to indicate which part is supposed to be transparent. And I just baked that shit in the background. We're going to add a new material here, and we're going to name that net. New image texture node, and load up the net alpha map. We're going to plug the alpha into alpha, then give me another image texture node, and in the other image texture node, give me the normal map, non-color, normal map node, color into color, normal into normal. We have to UV unwrap this before it becomes visible, and now we have a net texture. The transparency is not visible yet because we're still in just texture preview. In the rendered image, we're going to be able to see some holes here. This is supposed to be black. Right now, we're looking at the underside, so it looks kind of weird. But we're going to slightly inflate this, then duplicate this, and slightly deflate the new one. And on the new one, we're going to invert the normals. And now we have a net texture on both sides. Give me a node wrangler on the alpha map and also on the normal map. We're going to increase the scale. Let's try 888. That looks pretty nice, but you can always change that. Let's load up an HDRI. We're also going to need a texture for this cushion part on the inside of these headphones. Textures.com headphone does not want to let me download anything else for free. They say I don't have enough credits. So instead, I'm going to go to their competitor Ambient CG, which is going to let me download the same shit for free. So give me any texture. I don't care about the color. We're gonna download this in 2K, and now we can make a new material for the cushion. We're going to drag and drop the normal map and the roughness map into the material. Set both of them to non-color. This is supposed to be a dark gray color. Plug the roughness in the roughness. We're running the normal map through a normal map node, and now we just go to UV unwrap this and we're gonna be fine. We're gonna crank up the scale on this, give this a darker color. I don't really like their roughness map, so I'm gonna get rid of the roughness map and just set the roughness myself. Now we got all the textured materials out of the way. Just give me a simple black material for this thing that goes around your head. This has to be kind of like a rubber, so we're gonna make that a little bit more rough. This here is supposed to be some kind of very shiny metal. So give me a new material, assign it there, crank the metallic, and reduce the roughness. Then on the outside of the headphone, we need a simple dark gray material. It also has some kind of textures, but we can do this with a roughness map. We're gonna name this gray metal, make this dark gray, make it metallic, maybe a little bit lighter. And now to make the little spots here, give me a noise texture node, plug the color into roughness, Control T to give me a node wrangler. We're going to project that by object. Now we're going to increase the scale until we have these little spots like this. And we can add a color ramp node to control the contrast between the rough spots and the shiny spots. So instead of white, we're gonna have a light gray, and instead of black, we're also going to have a slightly darker gray. Apply the same gray metal to the buttons, but the top of this little button up here is supposed to have a different material. So we're going to select this, Control Plus to expand the selection. New material slot, again load up the gray metal and assign it, but we're gonna duplicate that into dark gray metal, and this is gonna be the same shit, just a little bit darker. Give me an empty set of axes in the middle. We're going to parent all these objects to those axes, and now we can very easily animate this like I showed you in yesterday's video, and the headphones are more or less good to go. I got a massive update coming to my Blender ebook in a couple of days. Right now it's all about modeling, but we're gonna add texturing, UV mapping, animation, camera, all this different shit that you can use for product visualization. If you get it before the update comes out, you got 20% off. Use the code that I'm gonna give you in the comments. If you're not sure if the ebook is any good or if it's a scam, then check what the people said in my community post a few days ago, where I asked you guys for some advice on what we should put in the ebook, and everyone's gonna tell you that it's a fucking gold mine. So check out the ebook, at least like the damn video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next one.